Over the past 3 years, we've seen near exponential progress in the capabilities of AI, with little to no signs that this progress is slowing. In fact, a recent paper led by ex-OpenAI researcher Daniel Kokotailo forecasts that by September 2026, AI agents will match a professional programmer's coding abilities, while simultaneously being able to think at 15 times the speed of the average human brain. This has, and should continue to, force a critical re-evaluation of our approach to almost every field of study, from the scientific to the artistic, film included. Every single major film studio has already integrated AI tools into every step of the production pipeline. Disney's Zurich-based research team has even created Face Director, a tool that utilizes AI to composite an actor's facial expressions from across multiple different takes into a single unbroken shot, allowing them to manipulate performances in post. As scary as that sounds, however, it's important to note that these are assistive tools, and that in the right hands with the right goals, these tools can be incredibly useful. However, in the hands of these major corporations, who already sell a soulless, repackaged nostalgia in an attempt to sate the insatiable appetites of their shareholders, achieving their goal of maximum profit means universal appeal, which in turn means sanitization and dilution of themes, messaging, and stories to ensure broad marketability across cultures. Given AI's inability to capture cultural subtleties due to the vast amounts of data it's trained on, the integration of it into this hyper-commercialized, homogenized approach to the creation of art is bound to only accelerate the sanitization we're seeing all across the cinematic mainstream. So how do we respond? We look to the past. In 1979, a Cuban filmmaker named Julio Garcia Espinosa published an essay titled For an Imperfect Cinema. Motivated by what he saw as the culturally imperialist tendencies of the cinematic exports of the First World, which places much emphasis on bourgeois notions of technical quality, he argued for the establishment of a third cinema in direct opposition to the capitalist sensibilities of Hollywood as well as the art house lean of European films. Espinosa spends much of the essay laying out the foundational context of the so-called imperfect cinema before finally defining it, stating, "Imperfect cinema is no longer interested in quality or technique. It can be created equally well with a 35mm camera or with an 8mm camera, in a studio or in a guerrilla camp in the middle of the jungle. Imperfect cinema is no longer interested in predetermined taste and much less in good taste. The only thing it is interested in is how an artist responds to the following question. What are you doing in order to overcome the barrier of the cultured elite audience which up to now has conditioned the form of your work?" Far from being dated, Espinosa's fight against cultural imperialism directly parallels the challenge of cultural homogenization that we face in this current era of cinema. Interestingly, the ideas he put forward in the essay are far ahead of his time. He predicts the universalization of college-level instruction, as well as the democratization of film technology, and even the impact that the invention of the television would have on cinemas worldwide. The ideas at the heart of Espinosa's third cinema would later be expanded upon by Dr. Alistair Gall in his 2016 thesis titled Towards a Cinema of Imperfection, Participatory Film as Research. In it, he defines the central idea of imperfect praxis, a film-specific participatory research method that resists the often rigid nature of theoretical academic work by embracing this DIY disruptive approach towards what is a typically procedural methodology. He then goes on to outline the driving question of the thesis. Can this framework of imperfect praxis create emancipatory value by making filmmaking accessible to all through the emerging social space of the internet? Gall's work leans very heavily towards exploring the participatory and theoretical dimensions of imperfect praxis. The idea at its core, however, is to deliberately disrupt these default, widely accepted methods of practice or creation so as to free the creator of this burden of technical quality and aesthetic polish that has increasingly become the focal point of the cinematic art form, even superseding meaning-making and storytelling as the primary driver of the creative act. As more and more studios begin to replace redundant roles throughout the production pipeline with AI tools, it stands to reason that when faced with creative decisions, these tools will have in mind the same goal of achieving broad universal appeal that studio executives have, which will only lead to an acceleration of the ongoing sanitization of screen content. The idea of deliberate methodological disruption at the center of Galt's imperfect praxis meshes well with the methodological approach of neo-formalism. While imperfect praxis concerns itself with the methods of creating, neo-formalist film theory deals with the consumption of said creation, exploring the relationship between a spectator and a piece of art through a parametric framework, forcing a viewer to critique each film on the strength of the unique formal elements utilized within the film, rather than through the rote, often formulaic approach typical of other avenues of criticism. One key principle of neo-formalism is defamiliarization, the act of presenting familiar things in an unfamiliar way so as to disrupt the viewer's habitualized perception of reality. As noted by prominent neo-formalist scholar Kristen Thompson, however, the effectiveness of this defamiliarization is tied directly to the historical context in which a piece is produced. Devices that may be new and defamiliarizing at the time of creation will slowly decline in effectiveness as their use becomes more and more commonplace. This synergizes perfectly with Galt's definition of imperfection as methods against methods, and by synthesizing the principles at the heart of these two parallel approaches to film, we arrive at a framework that, unlike frameworks created by past movements such as Dogme 95, Nick Zed's Cinema of Transgression, or even Third Cinema, does not center itself around ideology or specific techniques, but rather the principal philosophy driving the creative act itself. Nick Murcott's 2023 short Gooners is an excellent film to explore this proposed framework with, especially given Murcott's use of AI-generated elements through the film. Created as part of a university assignment, Murcott originally intended to shoot the entire film on the mini-DV format, but was unable to do so due to a requirement that a set amount of the film be shot using high-res cinema cameras. In the edit, however, Murcott settled on using this limitation to create an aesthetic juxtaposition between the jarringly high-definition moments of clarity for the main character and scrunched up images of his disintegrating mind. He goes on to state that the edit pace of the film attempts to evoke the information overload that comes with the overconsumption of the internet. Interestingly, this has similarities to a Brechtian technique known as the Würfendanks effect, a German term roughly translating to estrangement effect, a technique where stylistic devices are used to distance the viewers from the characters so as to critically engage the viewer, drawing their attention instead to the formal construction of a piece. Gooners inverts this technique, utilizing its frenetic pace to instead situate the viewer deeper into the main character's perspective. But the achieved effect is still the same, drawing the viewer's attention to the construction of the film. This is a clear example of both defamiliarization and the deliberate disruption of a method used since early in the 20th century, clearly demonstrating the driving philosophy of my proposed framework in practice. This philosophy is something that AI will never ever be able to reproduce by itself. AI thrives on mimesis. If we choose to respond to the AI-driven sanitization of art by simply chasing aesthetic imperfection, we fall into the same trap we face now. The unfamiliar we create will be rendered familiar in the mere blink of an eye. Instead, if we apply this guiding philosophy of utilizing deliberately disruptive, defamiliarizing methods of creation to our pursuit of artistic expression and analysis, we will find ourselves fighting this capitalistic, tech-bro-driven homogenization of art on terms dictated by us, the creatives, and us, the consumers. If we do not shift the goalposts set by these mega corporations, grooming us to endlessly chase the high of systematic optimization and perfection, we will lose this fight and we will lose it decisively. The only way forward is for us to bring those goalposts back under our control, embracing human imperfection with open arms and returning our focus, both as creators and as consumers, to the human expression of meaning and emotion that is the core of all art.